This past weekend showed host to a 600 plus player tournament in France. We're going to break down that entire event today, look over the overall breakdown of the event, and then, of course, the top 32. But we're going to also kind of showcase a little bit of the other decks. Normally, in the videos like this, I take a look at the best deck and the highest seeding for each different ink combination. But there were two decks that really stood out that didn't finish as the best seed, but I definitely want to take a look at them. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So here is the full breakdown, which is all of the 600 plus registered decks from the tournament. If we take a really good look at this, it really is simulating the metagame pretty much as expected. The one thing that I'm a little shocked about is that Emerald Steel did not go up in terms of overall breakdown. It's been sitting around this fifth seed now through two DLCs, even though it won a North American Disney Lorcana challenge. So the idea that it didn't actually overtake the Emerald Amethyst as the best Emerald deck or the most represented Emerald deck is a little shocking to me. I will say I feel like the Emerald Amethyst deck is more of a European deck. So there might just be a little more interested in that archetype than the Emerald Steel version. Maybe that's the reason for it. It's kind of hard to say. I'd love to know in the comments if, you're watching this back and you're from that area, if you feel like, Emerald Amethyst is just a homegrown list from Europe. I just feel like it's way more pushed over there and it's been way more successful over there as well. Definitely a little more underrepresented within the North American side. So I'd love to hear that. But the rest of this is pretty standard if you ask me, looking at the last couple of weeks. Ruby Sapphire being the number one played deck again, Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst a little bit behind. And then we go into the Emerald Amethyst, Emerald Steel, Amber Amethyst, Amethyst Steel, Sapphire Steel, and Sapphire Amethyst, going all the way down till two Emerald Sapphire decks and three Amber Sapphire decks, which I think is pretty crazy. Even though they were, not necessarily successful in the tournament, the idea that we have players register Amber Sapphire and Emerald Sapphire, even though it has just not been successful at all, even with, some other creators kind of putting a focus on it for Emerald Sapphire under the sea decks with Clarabelle and things like that. It just hasn't been successful. Amber Sapphire is mostly like this heroes aggro deck that hasn't really found a way to be successful as well. Ruby Steel with 10 Ruby Steel decks for register, which is insane to think about. That deck was successful in DLC Vegas, finding a way to a top 64. So seeing more people interact with that's pretty cool. Amber Ruby, another one. Mufasa has not really been good enough. So it's been hard to see an uptick of that deck still be successful. All in all, the breakdown I think is pretty even keel. The top four decks, I thought Emerald Steel was going to have a chance to break through into the top four, but just didn't happen yet. Maybe we'll see it if this kind of remains the same leading into Seattle. A little bit hard to say. So let's start breaking down some of these decks. I wanted to take a look at the one and only Amber Ruby deck that was finishing in the top 64. The cut was to a top 32, which we're going to look at that breakdown shortly, but I really wanted to shine some light on some of the other decks that were, honestly a point away or a win away from being there. And this is one of those lists that were. Amber Ruby Mufasa has been kind of like one of those lists that I feel like its truest of true fans are always playing it, and everyone else mostly writes it off. They, I think my favorite, in all honesty, is a comment made by my teammate Rob Serpay, is that if you want to finish in the top 16 of a normal set championships or like an SDG or things like that, you would play Amber Ruby. Or if you want to win a Let It Go, you would play Amber Ruby because Mufasa just it really isn't consistent enough, or it has not proven to be consistent enough to win a DLC or to like win a Star City event and like win a CCS and things like that. Like all these third party events are best of threes. Like this is the king of missed top cut deck. So shout out to Rob for me on that one because he always cracks me up when he makes that comment because it's kind of true. It's this deck that the truest fans like hype up, and then it's the deck that just never seems to deliver. And even here in the top 32, obviously there's only 15 of these played in the event, so make a top 64 with this deck is still nice, but there was 0 in the actual top cut of the event. But hey, here's the list for you guys. The standouts for me are Gaston. I do love the Gaston a bunch. I thought he was going to be a little more impactful to the metagame, but he really hasn't found a way to truly impact it enough. Maximus is practically incredible in this list in specific. It was another card that I thought was like maybe going to give life to this deck, but just hasn't come through. Maximus hasn't really been successful anywhere else. Wreck-It Ralph, I think, is the real star here. I think that if this deck is going to be successful, it's likely because of Wreck-It Ralph. And I think I would be building a little bit more with him in mind, understanding that we don't need cards like Maximus. We don't need cards like Gaston. We can probably just play Wreck-It Ralph and utilize that honestly double, lore gain and the idea to bring characters back, specifically, impactful characters like Rapunzel is just a phenomenal card to bring back. Mulan, another phenomenal card to bring back. These cards might seem innocent, like in a world where you're like, oh, they did their ability, they did their thing, they're gone. But if you can ever just pick up a Rapunzel and play it again, draw even more cards, and then not to mention you did it with a 6/7 gain 2 lore that has 2 lore, that's a pretty good stat stick that's threatening even more, knowing you can't just like leave damage on the table because Rapunzel will draw the cards off and heal the Wreck-It Ralph. I do think this list is pretty interesting. It's definitely developed over the last couple of sets now. I just think that there's a little too much of a toolbox going on here. And it definitely, I would rather be focused on the best combination of these cards because I think that's how this deck is supposed to win games. It just has to pick a lane, pick its target, and then stop worrying about like whatever we're flipping off Mufasa randomly and just plan to flip off the best cards from Mufasa more evenly. Aggro still on the market. This was a very successful deck at DLC Vegas. There was 3 of them in the top 11 after day 1 of Swiss. And, we've seen different versions of it, different iterations of it. This version, slightly different. Sven is making an appearance here. 4 Blue, 2 Donalds. Blue is a card that has been really talked about going in and out of this deck. I think it's like awkwardly too good to not play for what this deck wants it to be. But with cards like Under the Sea running around, cards like Let It Go and things like that, it's become a little bit more of a problem to like guarantee you're going to gain your 2 lore out of your 3 cost bodyguard, and that's definitely a problem. Zimba makes a return as well because at the end of the day, Daisy and the Zimba pretty good, forcing your opponent to interact immediately. They can't. And if they don't have a 1-drop, you don't have to worry about it. You can just go, Daisy into Piglet, threaten a bazillion lore, and now you have, even more bodyguards to kind of like protect you, specifically in a world where if you're just like, hey, I'm gonna Daisy on 1, Piglet on 2, they establish a character, and you're like, all right, my turn 3 is now gonna be Zimba plus, a Maleficent or a Lilo. I think if you're able to do that, like the game just ends. Like your opponent can't catch up, they're not gonna be able to win. Aggro decks have been really fun to watch. Definitely a little bit better on the, going second now. I think Sven is a pretty great addition to this list. I don't love having so many 4-cost cards, but a card like Sven protecting a Piglet as kind of just like another way to ready Piglet and just threaten, 5 to 7 lore again, I think is really, really big. I think this deck has been performing really well, definitely better than any other previous metagame, in my opinion. So this list across the field into a world of Ruby Sapphires and Ruby Amethyst and even Emerald Amethyst, like I think that you can really take advantage of those matchups pretty well. Obviously, your steel matchups are always going to be a pain, but nonetheless, I think we move on. We just pick our battles. If Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst are going to, maintain the position of 2/3 of the top 3 meta decks, then you just hope that you dodge Amber Steel, or you hope that you can steal a game on the play. Sapphire Steel came in at 33 played in the event, and this one was able to finish in the top 32. A version of this list has definitely been going around. There has been a lot of talks again about, hey, do I need to play a whole new world or can I not play a whole new world? This version is playing it. It is committed to it. And I think that that's fine. I think that you're seeing cards like Captain Hook and Smee being utilized as either the de facto removal for early game threats, And you're also seeing it, hey, like when I need to, I'm just going to put these guys in play, turn them sideways, and gain my early lore. If in any game that all I need to do is set up, a Pete plus Ariel, if you can just get to 10 lore and, you get into the game, you get into your 8 or 9 resources turns. Once you get to that 9 resources, if you just go Ariel into Pete, your Ariel basically just can't be removed. Like there's just no way to interact with that card well enough that's going to get it off the board. And then you just set up your free dime. Even if we're just looking to get 9 lore, right? If we get to 9 lore, Pete plus Ariel represent 11 lore. It's basically just a free win because there's not enough cards in the game that are going to interact with those 2 cards when your opponent can't play actions. I think that's all this deck is really trying to do and really trying to set up. And because of that, I think that you can just lean into that as well. I think this deck has become this other version of toolbox decks because players are trying to make sure they can answer every single card and, really just have all these niche answers to just about everything. I think for this deck to be successful, you just have to commit to being a combo deck. And you have to just commit to protecting the combo and just playing just enough cards to help you get and deliver said combo. I think that's been the core issue with Sapphire Steel in this particular metagame. And I think there's a real world that the whole new world versions should be better just because you can play cards like Vision to piece out to pick up the pieces of the puzzle that you want to find, and you don't have to give your opponent 7 new cards to interact with you either. All in all, I think Sapphire Steel has been a little under the radar. It might be a little bit better if you can tune it and, successfully beat Emerald Steel and Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst. Like if you can take away those 3 decks and then just be like okay in Ruby Sapphire, I think that's kind of where I would want to be with this list. If you just want to accept that Ruby Sapphire is a really difficult matchup, but again, if we can set up Pete plus Ariel, then there is a world where we can kind of get away and steal a win just because of those 2 cards. So here's a look at the top 32 breakdown and kind of the percentage of decks that were able to make it. We saw here, 1 Sapphire Steel, 1 Amber Amethyst, 3 Ruby Amethyst, 4 Emerald Steel, 6 Emerald Amethyst, 6 Amber Steel, and 10 Ruby Sapphires. So obviously, we went from 78 Ruby Amethyst decks to 3, way less successful, 73 Emerald Amethyst to 6, creating a much better conversion rate there. 92 to 6 on Amber Steel. So, although there was 20 less Emerald Amethyst, there were the same amount in the top cut. And then Ruby Sapphire, 10% of the Ruby Sapphire decks made it, 9.3 to be exact. So, I think that it's just showcasing like, yeah, Ruby Sapphire is the most played deck in the room, but there were still 10 of them in top 32. So it's not like they were removed or outclassed by anything. They were able to be successful and maintain success throughout the tournament and still threaten all the way into a top 4 scenario. Let's take a look at those deck lists from this event. So here's the top 8 Emerald Amethyst. This was the best performing Emerald Amethyst deck on the weekend. And I just got to say, I love this list. I love the inclusion in Clarabelle. I think that it's just a card that is screaming for more people to give it some love, some play. I think the card is very, very powerful. And specifically in any metagame where discard is threatening, I think that it's no shock to me that this version is the better version and most successful version of Emerald decks on the weekend. Everything this is doing is really just like negating a lot of what is going on. I think that this version itself is potentially a little bit more consistent in the Ruby Sapphire. I think it's just a better Ruby Amethyst deck on average and be a little more threatening. Taking away songs from Amber Steel also gives you a slightly better matchup into Amber Steel. So while I think that this deck is so very difficult to play well, because I think that it's one of those lists that you have to play every game kind of perfect in order to be successful with it. I think that's why we don't see as much of it, on average be successful in this event. Definitely a little bit more successful, a little more better of a conversion rate. So that's all really great. Maybe we'll continue to see that moving forward. But, the cards I think that stand out the most are Bonsai, are Lyle, are Clarabelle, and even the addition of You're Welcome now. all very great. I'm a little shocked that we're gonna go with Bell in this list. It's one of those cards that I think it's always gonna be okay. Obviously, it's a one of here, so it's not like it's some, three or four of. It's just, a niche addition to the toolbox that we have going on. In this particular list, we don't have a very often amount of times where we're going to get full value out of the bell. Specifically, it's just Lyle, and then our bigger characters like Gothel, Ursula, and Clarabelle. So maybe that's okay. Cogsworth is an MVP in my humble opinion. I can't believe it's only a one of in this list. I absolutely would find a way to play two or three of this card. I think it's just way too good. Even just in personal experiences over the weekend, I got absolutely crushed by Cogsworth, and it's going to be another card that everyone has to respect. It's very similar to me like Hidden Cove, where nobody respects the Hidden Cove. I don't think anybody's respecting Cogsworth. So it's definitely a card that in Amethyst decks, I'd find a way to include more often. Here's the top 4 Emerald Steel deck. And I did not go and strictly compare it to the Zan Syed list from DLC Vegas, but it is very close, if not an exact replica of it. I'm not positive if Zan was playing like 4 Hypnotize and things like that, but this list is pretty damn close. We covered this a couple weeks ago to its fullest. It's also coming up on the channel. I'm going to be interviewing one of the Emerald Steel extraordinaires in Dale. If you don't know him, he's a great guy, great human being, a lot of fun to be around. And he's one of the most successful Emerald Steel players throughout the Disney Lorcana Challenge series. I believe he's top, at least day 2 the last 3, maybe even 4 Disney Lorcana challenges in North America. So we're going to be talking about this deck and versions of this deck at length in an upcoming interview. If you have any specific questions that you would love to know about that, leave them in the comments. I'll do my best to try and get them in the interview. Let's talk about the next deck. Here's our 3rd place finish for Ruby Sapphire. This version is a little bit different only because of the choice between Sisu and Be Prepares. In most of the more successful decks for Ruby Sapphire recently, we've seen Be Prepared go down in numbers to 2 or 3 on average, and then Sisu being the 3 or 4 on average. This is definitely a flip on that ratio, saying I want 4 Be Prepared, I only want 1 Sisu. We're definitely way weaker to Pete in that world. But hey, I guess we just move on and kind of just go on with life. We also have just a very low amount of characters, if I'm going to be honest here. 4 Tipo, 4 Tala, 4 Hiram, 3 Maui, 3 Medusa, 1 Sisu, 4 Tamatoa, and 3 Maleficent. That's it. That's all of our characters. To me, when you look at a deck list and you see it on Dreamborn Links and you see only 1 row of characters, it's got to be a bit of a different looking list. It's crazy to me to see decks be successful with less than 30 characters. That's definitely not normal for Disney Lorcana. I would say the average Disney Lorcana deck plays 40 to 45 characters. So aside from like Steel Songs that, normally has 20 to 24 songs in it, which definitely differentiates the numbers a little bit. It's crazy that we're committed here to 3 one jump, 3 develop, 4 vision, 4 how far I'll go, like all of these sifting cards to do our best to find the characters when we need them. But it is just an understanding like, hey, we might open up a hand that doesn't have a character in it, which is kind of insane. Like if we have a mulligan hand and our mulligan hand comes back and it's like Medusa, Sisu, and then just stuff, like no early board interaction, no Tipo, no Grand Montage, anything like that, or no support. Gaston's our card that we've seen a little bit here and there. Just to name a few. Donald Duck is another one from the Sapphire Donald Duck from Shimmering Skies. We're just not playing any of these cards. We're just saying like, nope, we're gonna trust in our develop brains, trust in our visions, and we're gonna just flat out win games because of it, all the way to a top 4 finish in a 600-person tournament. I think Clement figured it out here, and this might be just a different version, a different style of this deck that if you're looking to really grind out games and just ramp like a monster, I think that this is going to be a pretty phenomenal deck for that. Ruby Amethyst finds a way into another finals in another tournament. No shock to anyone. This deck is just the the most consistent deck, I think, in Disney Lorcana. I believe that most Lorcana players have felt that this deck has just gotten like worse and worse in theory in terms of power level, But at the end of the day, it's just consistent. It does the same thing every game. It has answers to almost everything in Lorcana. And therefore, you always can leverage skill over anything. It becomes a choice of saying, all right, do I really want to be this most powerful deck ever and win every game on the play because my deck just does unfair things on the play? Or do I just want to play this deck that gives me a chance in every game? I think in a best of three format, Ruby Amethyst is probably one of the better decks in Lorcana, giving you multiple chances to win on the draw with a deck that kind of has answers to everything. Makes a lot of sense. In the two-game format, might be a little more difficult to be as consistent because it's asking you to say, I always have to win a game on the draw in a set. And I don't know that Ruby Amethyst can guarantee doing that. The numbers has definitely slimmed over the last couple events for Lorcana challenges, but it's a list that I think constantly grows. There's also another version of this we're going to be talking about in a little bit, but just to break this down, having the 4 castle and the 1 library, having 4 brawl, in the couple weeks ago in the top 4 deck, we had seen 1 brawl, maybe. I think maybe it was only 1, maybe 2 at max, with 2 B King Undisputeds. I'm not a huge fan of B King Undisputed right now in a world of Emerald decks being, at least 2 of the top 5 decks played. I do not like getting stuck with uninkable songs in my hand that are just free for them to Ursula away. But so I do like the idea that we just took them away, played more brawls, been great with that. I love breaking up the ladies here, having Madame Medusa and Lady Tremaine threatens kind of just the best of both worlds. The lack of Elsa is where I'm a little bit different on. I really do think Elsa's very well positioned within the metagame. So I think that I would definitely look at trying to play more Elsas and things like that. But all in all, this is just the stock standard list of Ruby Amethyst is very close to it. Choosing the 1-drops that we have here, having the commitment to Flynn and Sisu's, having the end game be the ladies, be the goats and the bounce and things like that. And of course, 5 locations. To me, it wouldn't shock me whatsoever if we can mess around with the numbers a little bit and even play more libraries. I think that this deck is at its best when you can be ahead in the game and just slam locations that let you draw cards. I think that's like the best version of this deck. So huge shout out to Paul here. Great finish. And, honestly, just like a really straightforward list of Ruby Amethyst, proving that consistency is king. So here's the winning deck here played by Baston. The Amber Steel deck, it always has these shining moments in metas that players kind of get off of it. They don't think it's consistent enough. They don't like it. It falls short. They bricked on a hand. I think that it's almost like this farce in Amber Steel players now that you can only play the deck for so long before it makes you angry. And I think that that's why we always see this like constant rotation of players that are interested in it. For me, myself, I played an Amber Steel in 2 Disney kind of challenges. My teammate took our team Amber Steel deck all the way to a second place finish in the challenge, but I just didn't have the heart to play it anymore in Shimmering Skies. So I haven't played it as much. I haven't been committed to it. And you can see here a little bit reason why. The only addition here is Pete and Naveen, which are great additions. They're very powerful cards. Having 4 Naveen is insane. That's a huge commitment, specifically in a world where we actually have less songs in our deck than average. This deck only has 19 songs, where most decks in the past were playing 22 or 23 songs. So our Ariel's a little worse. Our Naveens are a little worse. Paying 4 for a 3/3 with 2 lore that like doesn't play a song when on entry, I'm not crazy about that card at all. So having less songs and more Naveens is a little interesting to me. But I think the number one takeaway from this list is that Cinderella is very, very good. Cinderella Stouthearted is finally in a position that there's not enough good answers to that card. And if we can get it out on turn 5, I think that's our key factor way of beating Ruby Sapphire, because we're able to just get 3 lore, 3 lore, 3 lore. I think Ruby Sapphire has become like a real issue for Amber Steel decks, and it's something that I'm going to be focusing on very soon. Amber Steel is going to be the next breakdown of a single deck that we're going to have on the channel, and this is like really close to where I think you kind of need to be, or just understand why we need to be there for the Ruby Sapphire matchup while maintaining kind of a pretty fair success across everything else. The craziest thing about this list, without a doubt, is that there is 0 Ursula 2. And man, that card is so good. But I think that sometimes you got to make a specific decision. And I think decision made here definitely paid off for the player taking home the win in a 600 plus player tournament. Huge shout out to you. Congratulations on a great finish. And I really do love this deck list. So I wanted to shed some light on 2 decks that really stood out in this tournament to me. First and foremost, this list is awesome. We start with Megara. 5 cost, inkable, 4 strength, 4 willpower, ward with 2 lore, and the ability of whenever you play a character named Hercules, you may ready this character. So if we look at it as like a beast, the Emerald Beast from set 2 from Rise of the Floodborn, whenever you damage a character, you get to ready him. So he has the ability to kind of like combo off a little bit. This Megara can gain you potentially 4 to 6 lore depending on, what's going on in the game. But if you play this on turn 5 and then on turn 6, we could play a Hercules and then like shift to Hercules, and that would ready Megara twice so you can gain 6 more lore. What it also does is it enables incredible whole new world targets. So now we can sing with Megara, draw 7 new cards, play a Hercules, ready Megara, sing another song if we want to, play another Hercules, sing it again. I think the interactions with Megara in this list are very interesting. It's definitely something that I have not seen before out of like other registered deck lists that have been successful. It's really why I wanted to pick out that card in this deck, because I do think it's very interesting. Having 4 of the 2 cost Hercules, 4 of the bodyguard Hercules for the 3 cost, and then we have 2 of the 6 cost bodyguard, and then of course the other Floodborn. It just, this deck does really cool things, really interesting, and it's definitely attacking the game on a different front, along with utilizing, honestly, the resist 2 on Hercules Divine Hero. 6-3 with resist 2 right now in the metagame is pretty good. It's pretty difficult to deal with. Like, yes, there are even Ruby Amethyst decks that are cutting down on Maui's and things like that. So that's wonderful too, because this guy gets to live forever in that situation. I just think that this deck is really cool. It's really interesting. I really wanted to shout out Vincent for just like super innovation. I'm very interested in innovation right now, and I think that this deck is really leaning into that play style. So huge congrats to you, sir. The last list I wanted to talk about was the Wafo Topo top 8. For me, as a former World of Warcraft player, I'm very familiar with Wafo Topo. He was a world champion at one point in the game, so I've been following his career pretty much for the longevity of my card game career almost. And this Ruby Amethyst list, it it breaks the mold so well that I think that people didn't even realize yet that if you've been staring at the list and be looking at it and be listening to me talk, there are no goats in this deck list. We are playing Ruby Amethyst with no goats. Holy shit, is that incredible? Let's talk about it. So Ruby Amethyst without goats, committed, right? This is insane. We've seen Elsa's go into this list at the cost of Maui's, but nope, not in this one. We have 2 Elsa and 4 Maui's, 3 Medusa and 1 Lady Tremaine, 1 Sisu, 4 Be Prepareds, 4 Brawl, 4 Friends on the other side, 4 Castles. Everything else is kind of run of the mill. I think the scariest thing about this list is the lack of ways to gain lore. Sisu 3 is a 2 lore gainer, and Lady Tremaine is a 2 lore gainer. Of course, Big Sisu is a 3 lore gain, but every other card in this deck is turning sideways for 1 lore. And it's probably definitely a death by 1,000 paper cuts type scenario. But what I love the most is Finders Keepers. This is a card that in limited is like a pack one, pick one, almost how good it is. Drawing 3 cards in a slower format is just so very powerful. It's also inkable, which is crazy. But in this format, where it really feels like the half of the decks in the format are trying to be so aggressive and so fast, it almost seems crazy to include this card in your deck. But the other half of the format, being Emerald Steel Discard, being Ruby Sapphire controls, really like slowing down the game and grinding out games, you can very easily just pay 5 to draw 3 cards. In the mirror matches, when you're already ahead in the board and you don't want to play into a be prepared or a Sisu or things like that, you can just take a turn off, draw 3 cards, turn your guy sideways, and say, "Go ahead, I'm ready for your be prepared." I really think Finders Keepers is a very interesting addition to this deck, and I really just want to shout out the innovation here. Not playing Goat probably blows everyone's mind. I guarantee you, it is one of those scenarios where like, oh, this deck is trash. It doesn't play Goat. I mean, the deck just finished in the top 8 of a 600-person tournament, really just proving like, hey, we can break the mold. We can be different. We can make change. We don't have to do X because everyone says you need to. I think a lot of this is missed. It's just missed in Dizzy Lorcana. Everyone sees a deck list and they're like, oh, I need these 40 cards. Like, that's not always true. And the idea of playing Ruby Amethyst without Goat, but we have Snake, we have Fox, like we have those cards, but we don't have Goat. Why don't we have Goat? This is proving that, hey, maybe you don't need Goat. Maybe it's a card that you can cut. You know, if we're trying to make room for new cards and we're trying to innovate, this is kind of proof that, hey, even in the most staple card in Lorcana is cuttable. And that's really why I wanted to focus and leave you on this deck list, because I think it was the most interesting and most innovative deck list of the event, aside from the crazy Megara Hercules deck, which I do think that deck looks super fun. I can't wait to play it. There you have it, covering this event in its fullest as the week meta report here. I'm going to be focused on set champs decks as well, but I'm going to do my best to kind of break them up into separate parts. So as more results come in for set champs, be on the lookout for a video covering all set champs decks. And pretty much, honestly, I'm really focusing on some of the craziest set champs decks, because I believe a lot of players go into set champs and they're kind of discouraged about maybe their road deck or their the deck that they hold true. And I really want to prove and break the mold to say, hey, it's set champs, any deck can top 8. Honestly. Shout out to my wife this past weekend. She top 8'd her first tournament playing Emerald Ruby, which is a deck that's not really been a feature in the format. It's not this crazy, oh my God thing, but, just to prove that, hey, that deck can make a top 8. Like, it's possible that you can win a Mirabelle with just about any deck that you want to. So if you have a crazy deck that you top 8 it with, hit me up in the comments below. Drop me the link to it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to showcase it. I'm going to be focusing very much on some of those decks in an upcoming video. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button for me. We do this every single week on the channel. So if you like the vibes here, hit subscribe for me. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.